Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, this is from Group 3. We will present about fable, parable and allegory. The agenda layout is definition and differences of fable, parable and allegory, development and objectives of fable, development and objectives of parable, forms and example of allegory, and the story example. Definition of fable, parable, and allegory. Fable, Osborne 2010, explains fable as a prose or verse narrative intended to convey a moral. Animals or inanimate objects with human characteristics often serve as characters in fables. It is very obvious that the readers can learn an essential life lesson, more than just a fun reading from the fable. Parable. Parable is a metaphor or simile drawn from nature or common life, arresting the hearer by its vividness or strangeness, and leaving the mind in sufficient doubt about its precise application to tease it into active thought. Allegory. Allegory is a figure of speech in which abstract ideas and principles are described in terms of characters, figures, and events. It can be employed in prose and poetry to tell a story with the purpose of teaching an idea and a principle or explaining an idea or a principle. The objective of its use is to preach some kind of a moral lesson. It is a well-known definition by people, especially younger students, that fable is a type of story characterized by non-human characters, example, animals, in it. This fable understanding, unfortunately, oftentimes has not equal with the knowledge beyond the story, which is moral value. Based on the researchers' random survey on primary and junior high school students, they enjoy reading the fable stories. However, many of them only consider fable stories as just entertaining reading text with fauna, characters, and do not really know and even realize the tales contain moral lessons or value about life. Differences of fable, parable, and allegory. Fable is a short story in which animals or objects speak a story to teach moral or religious lessons. Parable is a short story designed to teach moral or religious lessons. Allegory is a story in which ideas are symbolized as people. The concept of allegory you are talking about is called personification and has been mainly used in literature in medieval times and the Baroque. In art, there are many allegorical pictures. A personification would be justice as blindfolded woman with scales. Fables are a subcategory of allegories, as are parables. Both probably are characterized by shortness. All three categories are forms of writing, art, or spoken utterance that encourage readers to look for meanings beyond what is said. As for the difference between fable and parable, the fable, as the author says, has animals, planes, or objects acting. It therefore has to anthropomorphize, while a parable draws its image from human interaction mostly. Therefore, a fable most of the time is more schematic in bold and easier to decipher. Parables often allow for different ways of deciphering. Looking at Kafka, Brecht, or biblical parables, it is clear that there is often a key, hint, or explanation needed to decipher the parable. This might be because a fable describes something that is naturally not possible, as the actors are anthropomorphized, creating its moral effect using striking simplification, while the parable describes a naturally possible incident, allowing for more complexity due to acquaintance, creating its moral or parabolic effect through surprise. Fable and parable therefore have much in common and overlap great. Development objectives of fable. The purpose of writing fable is to convey a moral lesson and message. Fables also gives readers a chance to laugh at the follies of human beings, and they can be employed for the objective of satire and criticism. They are very helpful in teaching children good lessons based on examples. However, in literature, fables are used for didactic purposes at a much broader level. Example: a crow was sitting on a branch of a tree with a piece of cheese in her beak when the fox observed her and set his wits to work to discover some way of getting the cheese. Coming and standing under the tree, he looked up and said, "What a noble bird I see above me! Her beauty is without equal." Down came the cheese, of course, and the fox, snatching it up, said, "You have a voice, madam, I see. What you want is wits." By Aesop. Aesopian fables put emphasis on the social communications of human beings, and hence the morals he draws deal with realities of life. That fables gives a moral lesson that flatterers must not be trusted.
The objective of parable. The parable doesn't analyze the social system very much because they trust the listener about their beliefs. The moral and spiritual pressure of the form falls on the memories of the critical faculty. The audience who hears the parable is assumed to have communal truth, but may override it or forget it. The rhetoric appeal of a parable directed at the elite, where the final core of its truth is only known by the inner circle. However simple the narrative may appear on the surface, or based on the parable used by Chris to help to by using the metaphor of the meaning rise by the meaning of the question needs to be discussed by the kingdom of heaven. The development of parable. In the West, the parable conventions are largely established by the teachings of Christ. It has been noted that parables can only be fully understood by an elite, consisting of those who can decipher the essence of the truth, allegorical wealth. The speaker can exploit the brevity of a puzzle that is similar to the style of presenting complex puzzle. Thus, parables are a very useful preaching tool. While theologians in the early Christian period developed Christ's enigmatic stories, preachers were creating their own stories to bring home direct lessons in good Christian behavior. Therefore, over the centuries, the model of Christ's parable has developed on Sundays in church throughout the Western world. As long as the sermon remains the main religious activity, the parable traditions maintain strong didactic tension. Its more paradoxical aspect gained new luster the theological and literary fields when the 19th century Danish philosopher began to use parable in his treatise on Christian faith and action. In fear and trembling, he recounted the story of Abraham and Isaac. In repetition, he treats episodes in his own life in a parable way. Such use led to strange new form of literary discourse, and his writings influenced, among others, Astrozek, novelist Franz Kafka, and the absurdist French philosopher, novelist, and playwright Albert Camus. The Kafka parable, full of doubt and anxiety, mediates the infinite gap between man and God and the role of the intermediary played by the law. His visions, which is strongly expressed in parables with the length of the novel, The Castle, The Trial, America, is one of the most confusing in modern literary.
The example of parable is a kind-hearted Samaritan story. The parable of the Good Samaritan is a parable told by Jesus in the Gospel of Luke. It is about a traveler who is stripped by clothing, beaten, and left half dead alongside the road. First a priest and then a Levite comes by, but both avoid the man. Finally, a Samaritan happens upon the traveler. Samaritans and Jews despised each other, but the Samaritan helps the injured man. Jesus is described as telling the parable in response to the question of a lawyer. And who is my neighbor? In response, Jesus tells the parable, the conclusion of which is that the neighbor figure in the parable is the man who shows mercy to the injured man, that is, the Samaritan. Some Christians, such as Augustine, have interpreted the parable allegorically, with the Samaritan representing Jesus Christ, who saves the sinful soul. Others, however, discount the allegory as unrelated the parable's original meaning, and see the parable as exemplifying the ethics of Jesus. The parable has inspired painting, sculpture, satire, poetry, photography, and film. The phrase Good Samaritan, meaning someone who helps a stranger, derives from the parable, and many hospitals and charitable organizations are named after the Good Samaritan.
Forms and example of allegory. Allegory in art. Visual art is a method of sharing ideas without using a single word. Everything from the colors on the canvas to the actual depiction tells a story and is intended to sway a mood. Example of allegory in art. Bronzino's Venus, Cupid, Folly in Time illustrates the time and valley that come with love. And then allegory in movies. Every story has a moral, and surely every screenplay has a moral. Movies are more than an exciting sequence of events. Even the greatest action films are more than that, defying stunt after stunt. Bravery, loyalty, and tenacity can be expressed in nearly any genre. Allegory in movies example is Network represents the many ways in which mass media controls people. This is clearly seen in the opening and closing shots containing for television screens. And then, allegory in literature. The beauty of literature is that it's jam-packed with rhetorical devices. An author never needs to bluntly state their intended moral. Rather, they can express it through moving scenes, daring dialogue, and inventive characters. Example of allegory in literature is Young Goodman Brown by Nathaniel Hawthorne is an allegory using the devil's staff to defy God and eat the forbidden fruit. And then the story example. Example of fable story. There is Aesop's fables, the monkey and the dolphin, the hare and the tortoise, and then Cardi tells. We will tell you a little bit about the hare and the tortoise. The hare and the tortoise is a trustworthy tale believed to be the work of Aesop. The story is about a hare or a rabbit mocking a slow-going turtle. The turtle replied with a challenge to compete with the rabbit. Although initially the rabbit went running his race away from the turtle and very sure of winning, he raced for a moment in the middle of the race arena. Then, after waking up from his rest, the rabbit saw that his love rival finally won the race. Thank you for your attention and see you.